Migrants often wait weeks or even months south of the border to have U.S. immigration officers hear their case.
It's happening near Eagle Pass, where migrant families are still streaming into shelters there, which are already over capacity. The crowded conditions force people often to sleep on the streets and even, in some cases, on the ports.
Our border reporter Oscar Margain takes us inside their struggle.
¿De dónde es usted? De Honduras.
Yosari Carolina and her 2-month-old daughter have found refuge at this shelter in Piedras Negras, Mexico, to shield themselves from the cold weather. In this video recording, the Honduran mother explains how she migrated for 2 months while pregnant to reach the U.S.-Mexico border. Yosari says she gave birth shortly after arriving to Piedras Negras, before she was physically able to walk to the Eagle Pass International Bridge in near freezing temperatures over the weekend to seek asylum.
We have a group of migrants in the streets, living in the street.
Methodist pastor Roberto Gomez recorded the testimony on his phone. He wants the world to see what's happening in Piedras Negras. With all 4 shelters there over capacity, many migrants turn to the bridge in a desperate attempt to get ahead of a long queue of asylum seekers.
Kids, women, and it's no good place to stay in the night.
In true Southern fashion, a network of Methodist churches in Central Texas responded to the call with a warm embrace, driving more than 200 miles to the border with loads and loads of donations.
This time of the year in the cold, all these blankets, coats, amazing.
This is just the start of it, but we have $1,350. The governments get to deal with the immigration policies, but what we see is that people are in need, they can't stay where they're at, it's not safe, and we don't want to see people suffering. So you get...
Thank you.
In the next few days, volunteers are going to sort through all the coats and blankets and coordinate with Pastor Gomez to make sure they get to people like Yosari. In the meantime, the Methodist Church plans to deliver a second round of donations by next week. They say that's when another wave of 300 to 400 migrants are going to be arriving to the border. In Eagle Pass, I'm Oscar Margain reporting.
The number of migrant families apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border hit a record high for the 4th straight month. More than 25,000 families were detained in November for illegally crossing from Mexico. Families made up nearly half of all apprehensions at the border.
Let's get the read on this from a guy who has a vested interest in this. I'm talking about Texas Congressman Michael Burgess. He joins us right now. Congressman, I know the Democratic leaders are meeting with the president tomorrow. They're hell-bent on saying, look, the $1.6 billion you got, Mr. President, for the wall is all you're going to get. I know you and your colleagues are looking, as is the president, for something closer to $5 billion. Where's this going to go?
Well, the president has identified the $5 billion figure as the dollar amount he needs to defend the southern border, and my opinion is he needs to get the money that he has requested. I know this is going to be a difficult fight, but I think the president would be correct in vetoing any bill that we send him that does not provide him the dollar figure he needs for us to provide defense for the southern border.
Do you think that John Kelly is going to be out of a job soon because he was trying to interpret what the president said earlier on, that it wasn't a full wall, the entire, border with Mexico, that the president was angered by that because he seems to want that wall come, hell or high water?
Yeah, and he's correct in wanting that wall. So, no, I can't speculate as to what or interpret what General Kelly may have meant or inferred. He's knowledgeable about the issue. He was the former Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, so certainly he has been to the border. Secretary Kelly has seen this firsthand. He knows what's at stake. And the images you just portrayed of people literally just melting through the fence as it exists today, that's why the president needs the defensive barrier of a wall, and he should get that.
Your colleague, Mark Meadows, is among those being bandied about as a possible replacement for General Kelly as chief of staff. What do you think of that? He has some very tough views on that wall that kind of mirror your own.
Well, I would not pretend to give the president advice for his chief of staff. The chief of staff position is extremely important, and I want the president to have a good one.
So, do you like Congressman Meadows?
I think the president has a number of people that he's choosing from, and I'll leave that decision to the president.
Well put, sir. Let me ask you a little bit about where this $5 billion would come from. In other words, if the president were to get his way on this, and you obviously get your preference on this, where would you take it from? In other words,
well, it would come in the monies that would be appropriated for the Department of Homeland Security. Remember, that was one of the one of the appropriations bills that was not done in September. We did defense. We did a number of other appropriations bills, Health and Human Services, but Department of Homeland Security was not done. It was a continuing resolution, or an IOU, written in September. Well, now that IOU has come due, and the monies would be appropriated out of those monies that were available for the Department of Homeland Security.
You know, Congressman, you had mentioned about the number of illegals who have melted through that wall, so to speak, or in other words, snuck through fencing that's already there. That would seem to indicate that whatever we build, we replace fencing that's there now, and that makes me think that's going to be a lot more than $5 billion, right?
Well, $5 billion is the down payment on the $25 billion figure that the president has identified that he will need in order to provide the operational security.
But this is the first time,
border.
sir, I'm sorry I wasn't clear, that we had talked about replacing walls or parts of walls and or fences up now that are not adequate. And we've only recently discovered with the Caravan they might not be adequate.
Correct, they might not be adequate, which is why the money put forward in 2006 for the Secure Fence Act, clearly that has not been satisfactory. That has not created the type of security that this country requires. And you know, don't forget, Neil, that we are the most generous country on the face of the earth when it comes to bringing in people legally. 1.1 million people per year come in legally to this country. So that's something of which we should all be proud. So we're not talking about ending immigration. We're talking about providing border security for our citizens. It is the #1 pledge we make to defend our nation, and that's what we should be serious about.
No, you were quite accurate to mention, you know, legal immigration is at record levels, and it has been for the last few years. So it's a good distinction you made there. Congressman, thank you very, very much.
Great. Thank you.
In Tijuana, small children were among a group of Central American migrants who crawled through a hole under a border fence. Some of them told reporters that they were too exhausted to stay in shelters on the Mexican side. They said that they intended to surrender themselves immediately to Border Patrol to apply for asylum. President Trump tried to make it harder to get asylum, but last month a federal court placed a temporary restraining order on his policy that only permitted asylum claims made at official ports of entry.
Transnational criminal syndicates are playing an ever-increasing role in the influx of migrants from Central America into the US. That's according to CBP Commissioner Kevin McAleenan, who says human traffickers charge up to $7,000 to take migrants from Central America to the US border and an additional $500 to get them into the US.
Actually being advertised by smugglers who start this at a retail level, almost like a travel agency in communities in Central America, saying if you bring a child with you, you will be released if you cross the border illegally, and you'll be allowed to stay in the United States.
Criminal gangs appear to be profiteering off the influx of mass migration into the US. Officials say illicit schemes involve Central American human smuggling rings, Mexican cartels, and US-based entities as well. And the statement from Commissioner McAleenan appears to echo President Trump's concerns over rampant crime at the Mexican border, previously denounced by the mainstream media as not true.
In some cases, you know, they're not the parents. These are people, they call them grabbers. They grab a child because they think they're going to have a certain status by having a child. You know, you have certain advantages in terms of our crazy laws.
McAleenan also says criminal gangs are bringing drugs and weapons across the border, using migrant families with children as a cover. He added, human smugglers stage mass crossings of the border by migrants to distract US security personnel and then attempt to deliver their illicit cargo. The commissioner echoed previous remarks from Trump administration officials that illegal mass migration is not a victimless crime, as it comes with other types of criminal activities and puts the lives of migrants and border personnel at risk.
We know that organizers of the Caravan have been pushing women and children and others to the front of the Caravan in hope that law enforcement will not engage them. This is particularly dangerous given the unusual propensity for violence.
Meantime, the CBP commissioner says migrant families made up 59% of those actually detained while attempting to rush the border last month. He says illegal alien families are encouraged to cross into the US by smuggler advertising policies, intimidation, as well as the loopholes in America's immigration law.
So we've got these really vulnerable populations in the hands of violent criminals, and they're coming on a promise that they'll be allowed to stay in the US. When really only 10 to 20% have valid claims of protection and asylum once their immigration proceeding is completed.
While migrant caravans are still faltering at the border, both border security and the Trump administration are calling for legislative action to curb illegal mass migration. But whether a seemingly divided Congress will be able to come up with a practical plan for immigration reform remains to be seen. Christian Rose, One America News.
Breaking news tonight, the Associated Press reports the Border Patrol has made 32 arrests at a demonstration at the border separating San Diego from Tijuana, Mexico. Tonight we have new evidence of the lengths some migrants will go to enter the U.S. This comes as thousands of other travelers are postponing or abandoning their quest. Correspondent Steve Harrigan shows us tonight from Tijuana.
The desperation of some can only be guessed at. What would drive parents to drop small children from an 18-foot border wall, injuring one? Or to push an 8-month-old baby through a hole dug under the same wall? They've come 2,000 miles north by foot or bus, carrying everything they own. Stalled now in squalid Tijuana shelters with a months-long wait for a chance at asylum in the U.S. Record numbers have crossed illegally. Border Patrol says 51,000 were arrested in the month of November alone, an increase over the same period last year of 78%. Thousands, disgusted by the filth and the wait, have given up and gone back home. But for some, home is no longer an option.
No, I don't want to go back. It's too much threat, and they try to recruit me, the gangs.
The frustration boiled over for a few hours 2 weeks ago when migrants tried to storm the border. The temporary border shutdown proved so costly to both sides, a new camp was set up 11 miles further south. Concrete has replaced mud, and donations have somewhat improved conditions.
There's a big need for underwear because there are no washing machines here, so we were giving away underwear and socks.
Many of the migrants are finding a middle ground, staying in Tijuana, where there's a strong labor market, and trying to move out of the shelters. But patience is worn thin. The violence, though limited to one day, has hurt local business and been a drag on tourism. Pay at one of the giant factories here is about $75 a week. Brett?
Back up. 32 people arrested today at the U.S.-Mexico border near Friendship Park. Border Patrol tells 10 News one agent was assaulted. 10 News reporter Travis Rice shows what some considered a peaceful protest was quickly deemed unlawful.
All you really hear are the sounds of the helicopters.
There are a lot of eyes on the border,
which I think gives a very eerie sense.
Especially now. Hundreds of activists marched through Friendship Park and Borderfield State Park, making their case why the U.S. should demilitarize the border and let all the migrants in.
Let us give them the resources that they need, but we don't need military, we need judges. We need judges listening to the cases.
Not approach the agents. Organizers called it a peaceful protest.
Back up! Back up!
There was a warning. They said if you come back down and come through again, you will be arrested.
Any violation of federal regulations is an arrestable offense.
A couple hundred people show up to do a peaceful protest. At least that's what it seemed like for the most part. However, we did have people trespass on the federal property, encroach on the federal property, so we had to make a few arrests.
Border Patrol says their agents handled it professionally.
I do want to highlight to people the issue here is exactly what we've said before. As my agents are looking north, trying to deal with this protest, they started taking rocks from the south side.
Today proving it's a tough situation on both sides.
It's unfortunate, but that's the dynamic we live in, is we're trying to put our attention in two directions, to be quite honest.
Travis Rice, 10.